goofy corporal in the 16th New York Cavalry by the name of Boston Corbett will silence Booth forever. You know what he did? When the barn was set on fire, he fired into the barn. He wasn't supposed to do that, but he wanted to make a name for himself. This kind of reminds, I mean, this goes full circle. It reminds you of Jack Ruby who shot Oswald. I mean, if you think about it, we'll talk about that. So Corbett had fired at Booth after the barn was set afire because he wanted to make a name for himself. He was a real weird guy. He was a religious fanatic, and this is the law of color, but I'm going to tell you the story. He once indulged himself in a prostitute, and he was so embarrassed because of his religion, and this is kind of gross, his punishment that he gave to himself is he castrated himself. I'm not making that up. So he was a religious fanatic. He once took part with a prostitute, and he was so guilt-ridden as a religious person, I'm not making that up, that he castrated himself. I mean, that's kind of mentality. And he's trying to redeem himself to a point. And when they ask him, why in the world did you shoot and kill Booth despite orders from Secretary of State, or excuse me, Secretary of War Stanton to take him alive, he said, quote, God wanted me to do it. True story. So, Corbett shoots this guy when he's not supposed to because he wants to make a name for himself. He's a religious fanatic for the reasons I explained earlier. I probably don't need to repeat. And when he was asked, why in the world would you shoot John Wilkes Booth and kill him despite orders by Secretary of War Stanton to keep him alive, he said, quote, God wanted me to do it. Now, Booth was shot through the neck, which severed his vertebrae. Okay? He was shot through the neck, which severed his vertebrae. And they drug him from the barn and laid him on the porch of Garrett's home, hopefully to try to keep him alive. So they drug him from the barn to the porch of the Garrett home, trying to keep him alive. Unfortunately, he died on that porch at the age of 26. So he dies. There are so many things that will ring a bell to you if we can remember this, which I'm confident you will when we start talking about the Kennedy assassination and the Lee Harvey Oswald, Jack Ruby thing. There's always somebody that thinks things are going to work out. Booth thought that he would be determined as a hero by the South for shooting Lincoln. It didn't happen. And we'll talk about the South's reaction to the assassination later. Corbett thought that if he shot Booth, that he would be a hero for shooting the assassin of President Lincoln. It's just a crazy story. Well, once Booth was caught, within days, all of those conspirators that we talked about were also caught. Then they were tried by the military and then sentenced. So it didn't take them long after the apprehension of Booth, even though he died, just within days, that they arrested all of the rest of Booth's conspirators. They were later tried by the military and found guilty. And I'll tell you what happened to them. Okay? So these conspirators were caught, tried, and sentenced. Yeah?
Have you seen, my grandpa has a deal and it has a Kennedy $50 and a Lincoln one?
Yeah.
And it shows the similarities between the two.
We'll get into that next year when we talk about the Kennedy assassination. You can look it up online. The Lincoln-Kennedy coincidences are pretty good. But you can, but they, we talk about that next year. Okay, yeah, there's one that's not so good at the end. But anyway, here's basically what happened on July 7th, 1865. On July 7th, 1865. July 7th, 1865. Atzerodt, Harold, Powell, and Mary Surratt were hanged in a public display to make examples of them. On July 7th, 1865, Atzerodt, David Harold, Lewis Powell, and Mary Surratt were all four hanged in a public display to make examples of. Mary Surratt was the first woman ever hanged in the history of our country. And if you want to watch a good movie, which we don't have time to watch at this point, it's called The Conspirator. if you get a chance, you're bored some weekend, get it up on Netflix and watch it. It's the whole thing about one guy trying to keep Mary Surratt from hanging, because really she didn't deserve it. I mean, for what she really did, I mean, you'll have to see it. It's a great, great story. And the guy that defended her, how do you think people thought about him? Not good. If you get a chance, you kids get together and say, we don't have anything to do, get The Conspirator and watch it. She's the first woman ever hanged. I don't know who, if there's been since, but I assume so. Now, this is kind of interesting. Shh, key in. Hey. Payne's neck was so thick, he was a thick-built guy. Powell Payne. Powell's neck was so thick it didn't snap, and it took him 8 minutes hanging to die. Now, a serious story. He had a real thick neck, and it didn't break his neck right away, and he stood there and kind of jiggled up and down, so to speak. It took him 8 minutes to die. Now, who are we missing here? We're missing some conspirators. Dr. Samuel Mudd, who's another conspirator that was involved in the kidnapping plot. John Surratt, Samuel Arnold, Michael O'Loughlin. But what happened to them? Well, Dr. Samuel Mudd, Samuel Arnold, and Michael O'Loughlin were given life terms in prison. Dr. Samuel Mudd, Samuel Arnold, and Michael O'Loughlin were given life terms in prison. Who are we missing? John Surratt. And what he did is he escaped, and Spangler didn't get, what did Spangler do in the end? He held Booth's horse for 5 seconds and then gave it to the poor little peanut vendor, remember? So Spangler, not so much. But John Surratt escaped to Canada and later then went to Europe to try to flee this deal. So John Surratt first fled to Canada, then to Europe. And they found him abroad and tried him in 1867, which resulted in a hung jury. So he was brought back in 1867 from Europe. He was retried, which resulted in a hung jury. What's a hung jury? You don't have absolute unanimous. One person votes not guilty in a jury, it's a hung jury. Okay? And what happens during a hung jury situation? What happens to the person? If it's a hung jury, they're set free. You're trying to prove them guilty. If you don't prove them guilty, if it's a hung jury, they're set free because they're, in essence, not guilty. Well, in 1869, new President Andrew Johnson, who succeeded Lincoln, pardoned Mudd and Arnold. He pardoned them. So they served prison terms until they were pardoned in 1869 by then President Andrew Johnson.
Which one?
That would be Mudd and Arnold. What happened to O'Loughlin? He died in prison before Johnson could pardon him. Okay? So Mudd was pardoned by President Andrew Johnson. Samuel Arnold was pardoned, but O'Loughlin died in prison. So who's the one that got set totally free? John Surratt, for the most part. And then Spangler, but he really, Spangler, whatever.
He ran away.
Yeah. Okay, now that takes us to a really short but important subtopic, the South's reaction to the assassination. How did the beat-up South react to the assassination of the Northern president? So the South's reaction to the assassination. Now I think most of you would say, I bet they were thrilled to death. Well, actually, most Southerners were not only shocked, but they were saddened by Lincoln's death. I want you to think about why. Most Southerners who fought a war against this man for years at a tremendous loss of life, most were shocked at his assassination and saddened. Why? Matter of fact, let me give you this quote first. You remember Confederate General Joe Johnston? He survived the Civil War, and when he was told about the assassination, he said, quote, "We have lost our best friend." What do you mean by that? What was Lincoln's plan for the South after the Civil War? Pretty generous, because he took crap from the radical Republicans, right? So the South were going to be in worse hands than they were before, because the plans of others, especially the radical Republicans, was not so much. So because of Lincoln's assassination, the South, historians say that the South was treated more like a conquered country than they were anything else by the North after the death of the president. That the South was treated more like a conquered country by the North after Lincoln's death. They were not getting the same thing. Okay? Now, we're gonna go through one more couple things here, we're gonna quit. We're gonna go to the next subtopic, which is problems following the Civil War. So what are we talking about now? We talked about the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. What are we talking about now? Reconstruction of the South. So, we've already talked about some of this, so you should have an idea. What were the three major problems after the Civil War that we already talked about? What was the problem we had to solve after the Civil War? And Lincoln's assassination disrupted it.
What to do with the states?
What, yeah. On what terms should Confederate states be readmitted to the Union? What was another problem? The two senators stood up and made it clear they wanted to take care of right. So how to deal with the issue? How were these former slaves going to adjust to freedom? We had two senators, Stevens and Sumner, that demanded that they be trained properly, so to speak, so they could adjust. And the third problem we talked about that I didn't emphasize too much is, what about these Confederate leaders that they didn't pardon or give amnesty? What are they going to do with them? So the problems that we faced were, how are we going to readmit the states? Readmitting the Southerners wasn't that tough, was it? Other than the officers, right? How are we going to deal with the officers of Confederate? And how are we going to help these former slaves to adjust to freedom in the United States? Now, this period of time to answer these three questions went from 1865 to 1876. From 1865 to 1876, we're trying to answer and solve all these problems. What is this period of time from 1865 to 1876 called in our nation's history? Say it. Say what the answer is. Reconstruction. So from 1865 to 1876, that period in American history is known as Reconstruction. 1865 to 1876. It's called Reconstruction. Now, I'm going to give you one more subtopic, short one, then we'll be done for the day. Yeah. The problems, well, you don't really have to write them. You should have them before. One of the problems was, what are we going to do to readmit these Confederate states into the Union? Second problem is, how are we going to get these Confederate officers? What are we going to do with them? Because they were not given amnesty or a pardon, right? And then how are we going to have these former slaves adjust to being free countrywide? Okay? And those problems were talked about from 1865 to 1876, and that time period in history became known as the Reconstruction. Now, we're going to talk about Andrew Johnson, the new President of the United States. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about him, and then tomorrow we'll get into his new administration and a big problem he had right away. So, Andrew Johnson, the new President of the United States. Now, you saw in the movie that he was a little bit different. What did he do at his inauguration? He got drunked up. Yeah, he was drunk during his inauguration. Well, hard as it might be to believe, Johnson actually agreed with most of Lincoln's plan for Reconstruction. So it was his intention to put Lincoln's plan into action. South didn't know it at the time, but it was a good deal. Okay? So Andrew Johnson agreed with President Lincoln's plan for Reconstruction for the most part, and he intended to put those plans into action. What about President Johnson? What's he like? Self-educated man. What does that mean? Who else learned himself? Who else learned himself? Yeah, who else we talked about? Well, he didn't so much. We spent a lot of time talking about this guy. Andrew Jackson. By the way, flashing news, Harriet Tubman is going to replace Andrew Jackson on the $20 bill.
When?
They just announced that today.
When?
Pretty soon.
Changing the $10 vote on
No, that's what the flashing news was on the Gazette.com today. It came up. Harriet Tubman has been chosen to replace Andrew Jackson.
Why are they taking Andrew Jackson?
Because they want to put a woman on a bill. They're not going to, you're not going to make any new bills.
I thought they were going to take him off the. I thought they were going to take
Change their mind. Breaking news today. You heard it first right here in AP US History. Hey, there we go. Shh. Hey. Anyway, Johnson was a self-educated man. He didn't have any formal schooling, just like Abraham Lincoln, just like Andrew Jackson. What are you doing there, phone man? Yeah, you better look it down. Now, Johnson had a good political career. His first stab at politics, he was elected mayor of his community in eastern Tennessee. He was elected mayor of his community in eastern Tennessee. Then he got elected to the House of Representatives from Tennessee. And what do you normally do when you're elected to the House? Then you usually go to what? He did. But in between that, he was elected governor of Tennessee. So this guy had politics. He was a mayor of his community in eastern Tennessee. He served in the House of Representatives from Tennessee. He served as governor of Tennessee. And then he served as a United States Senator from Tennessee. Now, this is something you might not know. Where's he from? Which is in the South. Even though he was a Southerner, he was very loyal to the Union, and he resisted Tennessee's secession from the Union in 1861. So even though Andrew Johnson was a Southerner, born, bred, his whole political career in Tennessee, a Southern state, he was a loyal to the Union, and he actually resisted Tennessee's secession from the Union in 1861. Now, Johnson once said of President Lincoln, you don't have to write this down, but I do want you to listen to it. He said, "I voted against him. I spoke against him. I spent my money to defeat him. But I still love my country. I love the Constitution, and I intend to insist upon its guarantees." His point being that even though he didn't support Lincoln in his election, he supports the Constitution, which Lincoln believed in, and he supports what people's guarantees are because of the Constitution. That's why he accepted Lincoln's plan for Reconstruction. Now, this is why all these political positions I was telling you about is why he was elected vice president with Lincoln in 1860. Because some of you might think, my God, why would Lincoln have a Southerner? Well, he wanted to balance the ticket, so to speak. This was pre-Civil War, and he got a very good politician from the South to run with him, and that was the reason. Okay? So Andrew Johnson, even though he got drunk at his inauguration, he's not an idiot. He's a very esteemed politician with a lot of experience, and he's going to have to take over the country now after Lincoln's assassination. Tomorrow we will talk about opposition to Andrew Johnson, because he's going to get it right away. From who? Radical Republicans. Who's on a 10 now? Alexander Hamilton? Yeah. We all know all about him, don't we, Mason? Alexander Hamilton. Hey, I'm telling you what, I'm not happy. You know who my choice